Hey friends, my name's Georgie and you are listening to the Just Breathe podcast, where I'll be talking all things breathing to help empower you guys to use the power of your breath to harness your bodies and minds. Today's episode of the podcast is something a little bit different. A truly inspirational woman and good friend of mine, Jo Hainsworth, has written an incredible piece on copper toxicity, how it can occur, and how so many women across the world are suffering with its effects without even knowing it. Jo has been learning everything she can to support herself in recovery from severe PTSD, and along the way has found that she can use the knowledge and tools, especially the tools of breath retraining, to help others out on their journey. She's retired and spends some of her time acting as a voluntary health educator, connecting people with the resources they need. She is so driven by the desire to get the resources that she didn't have earlier on her journey into the hands of those who could use them now. Jo has recorded herself reading the piece that she has written and wants to use this podcast as a vehicle to get this incredibly important message out there. A little bit of housekeeping. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Just Breathe podcast. The more we can build our breathing community, the more we can get important messages like these ones we're hearing today across to the wider collective. Let's keep inspiring people. Let's keep empowering people through the power of the breath. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jo to deliver this incredibly important message. I hope you enjoy the episode and walk away with as many empowering insights as I did. This is episode 33 of Just Breathe with Jo Hainsworth.
When I trained with a psychologist in the US in hair tissue mineral analysis, he kept going on about something called copper toxicity. I'd never heard of it before, and to be honest, I initially thought it was just his hobby horse and couldn't possibly be as widespread as he suggested. He told us on the course that around 80% of the hair tissue mineral analyses he was seeing pointed to copper toxicity now. Since completing the training, I've found the same myself, and I've been raising awareness about this ever since, because the results of untreated copper toxicity can be heartbreaking. The main source of excess copper came as a surprise to me, as it's birth control, both in the form of copper IUDs and estrogen-based birth control pills. If you're wondering why your doctor hasn't raised this as a potential issue, it's because they don't know. All the trials on birth control have been done using blood tests, and because the body stores toxins in the tissue, mainly in the liver, because it's too dangerous to have them circulating in the blood, that means that the blood tests are actually really unreliable for detecting this sort of toxicity. It's understandable that a copper IUD could maybe lead to excess copper, but it seems strange to me that estrogen-based birth control pills could do the same. Once I did a bit of research, though, it all made sense. As estrogen levels rise in the body, more copper is retained, and that's because estrogen levels rise during pregnancy, and a lot of copper is needed by a developing fetus. So the female body is designed to retain more copper as estrogen levels rise. After a woman's given birth, copper levels will stabilize if there's no toxicity to compromise her body's ability to release the excess copper, but in the case of birth control, there is no pregnancy and therefore no reduction afterwards, so the copper levels continue to climb each month. There are a large number of possible symptoms of copper toxicity, the main ones being premenstrual symptoms, fatigue, weight gain, memory issues, attention and focus issues, sluggish thyroid, mood issues, anxiety, postnatal depression, and breast milk supply issues. For some women who have these symptoms but haven't been on estrogen or copper-based birth control themselves, the issues started before they were even born, because copper toxicity can be passed on in utero. Women who are currently around their late 30s who have thyroid issues or fatigue may have them due to their mothers being on the very early, extremely high dose estrogen-based birth control pills, which in some cases led to copper toxicity developing very rapidly. What was really scary to learn when I was doing the training is that there are now babies being born to these mothers who are third generation copper toxic, with the copper being passed from mother to child in utero. As copper levels rise further with each subsequent pregnancy, the more children a copper toxic woman has, generally the more copper they come into the world with. And some babies these days are being born jaundiced even because of the copper load in their tiny livers before they're even born. While more research needs to be done into this area, there is some research that suggests that women who experience premenstrual symptoms have much lower levels of CO2 in their blood than women who do not. Many copper toxic women are low in blood CO2 levels, so there's a strong possibility that breath retraining to build their CO2 levels up could help to reduce the horrible symptoms they're experiencing during the luteal phase of their menstrual cycle. During this phase, from ovulation to menstruation, progesterone levels rise, and research has shown that this increases breathing volume and results in loss of CO2. While many believe that CO2 is simply a waste gas, it's actually used in many, many functions in the body, and a deficiency of CO2 leads to many of the symptoms of premenstrual syndrome, including anxiety, irritability, and brain fog. If you suspect the possibility of copper toxicity in yourself or any of your children, I recommend working with an experienced mineral balancing practitioner who can do a hair tissue mineral analysis to determine the likelihood of copper toxicity. These tests are far more reliable for detecting copper issues than blood because they look at the level of minerals in the tissue, not the blood. However, reading the tests is a specialist role. The results can be really deceiving because with more advanced copper toxicity, the hair copper level is often deceptively low because the thyroid and adrenals lack the strength to detoxify the excess copper. That's why you need a well-trained practitioner to interpret the results, because they know the mineral patterns that indicate what is known as hidden copper toxicity. If you want to find a mineral balancing practitioner who's experienced with this, you can check out a listing on my website at empoweringhealthdownunder.net/findmbprac. So that's empoweringhealthdownunder.net/findmbprac. Unfortunately, the mineral balancing industry is not regulated, and there are a large number of practitioners offering hair tissue mineral analyses who do not realize that they have not been adequately trained in interpreting the data. So it's really important to work with someone with the right experience. If you think copper toxicity might be an issue for you, there's also a really good Facebook group that provides peer support for many women going through this, and that group is called Copper, IUD and Toxicity Support Group. Where there is copper toxicity, it's important to remove the main sources, and a mineral balancing plan based on your own individual biochemistry can help the body to regain the strength needed to begin to detoxify the excess copper. In some cases, women don't need this. If the toxicity isn't too severe, removal is often all that's needed, and over time, the body can detoxify. I also highly recommend breath retraining as part of recovery from any form of toxicity, because the toxicity generally causes people to develop dysfunctional breathing patterns, even though most are not aware of these patterns in themselves. Breath retraining can give quicker results than mineral balancing alone, which, while important, can take longer to turn things around. The breath retraining also means that the body has the oxygen it needs to jumpstart metabolism and can really make use of any supplements that the person takes. This enables you to optimize CO2 and oxygen levels in your body and mobilize your nervous system to be much more able to detoxify the excess copper. As most copper toxic women experience anxiety or depression, and there's an inverse relationship between CO2 levels and anxiety, so low CO2 means high anxiety or depression, and sometimes flipping between the two. breath retraining can make a really big difference for someone with copper toxicity. I'm really passionate about the breath retraining because of what I've seen in my own life. Although I am fortunate not to be copper toxic myself, I lived with anxiety for decades, and I was astonished to find that after a couple of months of consistent breath retraining, the day-to-day anxiety I had always lived with started to fall away. As an example, this morning I was laughing about an incident that happened here on our property that in the past would have caused a huge spike in anxiety that today didn't even result in a blip. One of our cattle got a bit feisty with my partner as he was moving them from one paddock to another. And while I've consciously always known that this particular animal is just being playful and poses no real threat, in the past I haven't been able to get that message to my primitive brain, and my body behaved like I was in a war zone whenever it was happening. This morning I was amazed to be relaxed as it all played out. I thought it was a great example of how breath retraining can make a big difference in someone's day-to-day life. And in particular because I had no idea I was a dysfunctional breather. I breathed through my nose and I thought there was no issue. I was a long-term meditator, but I had developed dysfunctional breathing patterns due to stress. I really like living without the constant anxiety that I didn't even realize I used to live with until it fell away. I knew I was a bit of a worrier, but now I can see just how much anxiety drove so much of my behavior in the past. So getting back to copper toxicity, here's some of the questions I regularly get asked about it, together with some answers to help you understand it more. Does everyone who have a copper IUD end up copper toxic? How a woman's body deals with copper is affected by many different factors. For some, they have issues very early on, and for others, the issues only show up months or even years down the track. And presumably there are others who are just fine. I tend to only come across those who have issues because they're the ones looking for answers. Your ability to handle copper depends on the state of your liver, your stress levels, whether you inherited copper toxicity or not, and even your genes, as some have genetic variations that make it much harder to detox than for others. What I commonly see is people either have symptoms very quickly after placement, but they're told by their doctor that the symptoms are due to postnatal issues where they've recently given birth, or they just write them off as unrelated, or the symptoms show up a few months or even years down the track, too far after placement for it to occur to them that the IUD could be a driver for them. But I'd imagine there must also be others who have low stress levels, good adrenal strength, and good genetics who don't have issues. Another common question is, there's loads of women on estrogen-based birth control. Are they all being affected in this way? And again, it's like with the IUDs, there are many different factors that determine how a woman's body handles the retention of copper as the estrogen levels rise. And those who cross my path tend to be the ones looking for help. What concerns me most is the delayed onset of symptoms for many, so that it just doesn't occur to them that the birth control could be contributing. And some of those symptoms can be really devastating. Relationships breaking up, for example, because the woman is so volatile due to the huge effect the copper has had on her body. And meanwhile, her partner and her doctors just want her on anti-anxiety medication and are implying it's all in her head, which makes me really sad. Another question that I often hear is that someone themselves or their friend wondered about their symptoms after getting a copper IUD, but their gynecologist assured them that it's non-hormonal and it couldn't possibly be the issue. This is unfortunately the mainstream message, and it means that women just aren't getting the answers they need. The medical folks seem to be obsessed with hormonal imbalances being the only manifestation of birth control, and they just aren't trained in the complexities of the mineral system. The symptoms women are having with hormonal birth control are often actually due to the effect of the copper on their system, not just the changing hormone levels. Another common question I get is about hair falling out, whether or not that could be related, and unfortunately this is a really common symptom. It's horrifying to see the photos in the copper IUD group of women's hair falling out. Copper pushes out large amounts of minerals, including zinc and potassium, both of which are really important for hair growth. It can take a while after removal, and some women need supplementation support to turn things around, but the hair thankfully can regrow once the body has enough minerals. Another common question is, how long does it take to detox excess copper? And this one's a really tough one to answer. It's kind of like asking how long is a piece of string. There's just so many factors feeding into this, including stress levels, genetics, all the things I said earlier about how women are affected differently. Some find that they're able to naturally detoxify without any assistance over a few months, and others can be in for a much longer term recovery and need assistance. As well as menstrual symptoms, it's really common for women to ask me whether it could be related that they have a really tough time around ovulation, and this is definitely related. We see this so often, and I believe it's because the estrogen levels are at their highest at that time of the menstrual cycle, so that means more copper is being retained. Copper affects so many parts of the body, and so it can have a really big impact when the levels are even higher than usual. Another common question is if someone is concerned that their kids might have inherited copper toxicity, what can they do? So kids can be tested from around 2 or 3 years of age with hair tissue mineral analysis, and an experienced mineral balancing practitioner can put together a program for them based on their individual biochemistry. Unless it's severe, kids tend to respond much more quickly than their mums because their adrenal and thyroid strength hasn't been taxed for as long. I'm also often asked to give an example of the changes someone can experience in their symptoms as a result of detoxifying. And my teacher, Dr. Rick Malta, gave a great example of this in our training course. Decades ago, a woman read an article that Dr. Malta had written about copper toxicity. He's been trying to raise awareness of this issue for a long time. She'd had such severe postnatal issues that she was hospitalized in a psychiatric unit after the birth of her first 2 children. She then went on to detox from copper prior to conceiving her 3rd child and had no postnatal issues at all. This shows the power of detoxifying, because generally if you've had postnatal issues after the birth of a child, they will be as bad, if not worse, after any subsequent pregnancies, because the copper levels keep climbing. So it was a powerful example of how much you can turn things around by addressing copper toxicity. I really appreciate Georgie helping to raise awareness about this, because it's an issue that actually is affecting so many people, and most of them don't know it. My heart really goes out to all those who are suffering from this, whether they're aware of the issue yet or not.
I really hope you enjoyed the episode and feel inspired and empowered by the knowledge that Jo has shared. If you feel like this episode is relevant to anyone you know, a friend, a family member, or a partner, please do send it their way. If you would like to help yourself with breath retraining and cannot afford to work with a breathing educator, Jo is currently running a pilot program with a series of online videos. She wants to see if a free program could help those who cannot currently afford one-to-one support. The pilot is officially closed, but Jo said she'd be more than happy to sneak in a few extra participants from listeners of this podcast if you would like to take advantage of that opportunity. The program is self-paced, and you would need to be able to find the motivation to spend some time on your breathing each day. However, there is an option in the program to buddy up with someone else to help each other hang in there with it long enough to see the benefits of breath retraining. Jo is incredibly knowledgeable and has experienced the profound benefits of breath retraining herself, and I couldn't recommend her program enough. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I'll see you next time.